statement. Rightly, you reminded us of Section 851A of the Taxes Consolidation Act 1997, which precludes you from discussing the tax affairs of any taxpayer. Why is that law in place? What's the logic of that law?
Well, taxpayer confidentiality has been part and parcel of the Irish tax code since the foundation of the state. Section 851A was actually inserted into the TCA a number of years ago to confirm that process. So, Deputy, it's ultimately a policy issue. It's a decision that whether you end up with a complete open process making tax records available, everybody's tax records available, ultimately is a decision that I do not make. I implement the law. It is a criminal offence to breach Section 851A.
I've seen enough episodes of Yes Minister to understand that there's a difference between people who oversee policy and people who have responsibility for operation of policy. I clearly understand that it is your role to implement whatever policy is in place, so obviously I understand that. My point is that there are other countries where there is proper scrutiny and even publication of the taxes paid by individuals, including high net worth individuals and companies. So we operate a different system. We are the Public Accounts Committee, and it is our job to scrutinise how money is spent, which can be done very easily, and how money is raised, which is more problematic, because we cannot discuss whether or not individual companies or individuals themselves have actually paid the taxes that they hopefully will come voluntarily. Some have already acknowledged that they will.
Just Deputy, for the record, I just want to, just on that point, a point of public information, good to say it now, just to confirm, we have invited Google and Apple, JP Morgan, Citibank, GlaxoSmithKline and Pfizer to assist our committee in our understanding of corporation tax administration from their perspective. JP Morgan have been in touch with the Secretariat rearrangements for an engagement, and Citibank and Apple have made initial contact with the committee also. So,
and just to finish my point, because and I understand that you are limited in what you can say, and feel free to completely disagree with me in terms of my analysis as well. But what I see when I see systems in place that preclude us from talking about taxes that people can pay is a system of secrecy. And I don't like anything where a system is built around secrecy. I would much prefer if we have full transparency, where we could examine all of these issues, where we, especially as the messengers of the people, and as a Public Accounts Committee, we have a clear duty to examine systems, processes and procedures in respect of how money is raised and spent. I don't believe we're fully in a position to do that because of the limitations of that Act. And I'm of the clear understanding it's not for you to even comment on that. I'm just making that statement by way of an observation. If you want to respond, you can.
It's not so much that responding to you, but I think what is important is that the Irish tax code is set out in legislation. The Office of the Revenue Commissioners is established under law to administer the tax system and to collect the tax administration. I have a responsibility as chairman of the board of the Revenue Commissioners and accounting officer for the Office of the Revenue Commissioners to appear in front of yourself and other committees. We publish detailed annual report. We have governance frameworks in place that we actually are accountable for. We publish our annual report every April with detailed analysis of our activity, and we also over a long number of years and increasingly publish granular data around comparing annual receipts from corporation tax, for example, with CSO and economic activity. We are also subject to examination by the Comptroller and Auditor General. who has permanent access to all our systems, all our files, all our records in respect of every taxpayer in the state.
Sorry, Mr. Cody. No.
You've asked me if I wanted to comment, and I'm commenting.
And I'm simply.
I just want to finish.
Sorry. With respect, 'cause I'm aware of all of that.
Yeah.
I'm aware of the macro work that revenue does. I'm aware of what information the Controller and Auditor General is privy to or not. I'm talking about the Public Accounts Committee, which you well know. So my statement wasn't in respect of what you know or what Mr. McCarthy knows or has access to. It is what we have access to. I'm fully aware of what your function is, what your responsibilities are, what your powers are. So you could spend half an hour telling me all of that. I'm aware of it. I was simply making a point that because of the act that I cited, it makes it problematic for me to truly scrutinise whether or not companies are paying their taxes or not. That's my point.
I do think as well that the idea that that any political process would get involved in the detailed examination of the tax returns of individuals in the state, I would just counsel that may not be the wisest thing.
And I would say
it wouldn't be a feature of any operation in any democratic situation.
There actually is, and
there are administrations who publish summary data, and that's absolutely part of, and the best example of it is the Scandinavian countries, and that reflects the culture and the political system. And if that is the case, if that law was provided for, we would meet our requirements under legislation.
I have that, and I'm going to just finally on that point, revenue and money that's raised is public money.
Absolutely.
It's public money, and we
provided for, we would meet our requirements under legislation.
I have that, and I'm going to just finally on that point, public money.
Absolutely.
It's public money, and we, in my view, have a duty to examine whether or not public money is in the first instance going into the public coffers, and then we examine how it's spent. So that's my point. You say in your opening remarks as well, Mr. Cody, that revenue's approach to tackling offshore evasion is recognised by the OECD as best practice and has been adopted by other tax authorities. Do you believe that Ireland is a tax haven?
You're referring to the opening statement I made last night to the Finance Committee.
Sorry, the Finance Committee, was it?
Yeah.
Okay, yep.
I don't believe Ireland is a tax haven, definitely.
Yeah, and you referred to the OECD as the benchmark because they say that we operate to the best practice.
But what you're quoting is our approach to tackling tax evasion using offshore structures. And we are a benchmark of best practice. What we did in relation to tackling tax evasion using offshore structures, starting in 2003 with the Offshore Assets Group, the fact that we've raised in excess of €1 billion in relation to tackling tax evasion through offshore, using offshore structures, the changes that we made in relation to the opportunity to use voluntary disclosure in the context of people with offshore matters, the settlement opportunity that was finalised on the 4th of May, where we raised a further 84 million for the use of offshore structures to facilitate tax evasion, is part of a process. We had a good discussion about it last night. I've discussed it at the Public Accounts Committee in relation to HSB Swiss, and it's a core part of some of the inquiries, that the investigations that the Controller has done. It's going back to the original work of the Public Accounts Committee in '99 in relation to bogus non-resident accounts.
Mr.
And
Cody,
the process that we use has been adopted by a lot of tax administrations following the work that we've done.
Okay. Do you believe there are any tax havens? Any countries that operate as tax havens?
Deputy,
I'm not asking you to name them. I'm saying, do you accept that there are in tax havens in operation in some parts of the world?
Deputy, there's issues around definitions of tax havens. The OECD have a process around tax havens. Right now, in the context of the EU, there's work going on around what's called the blacklist process, and that's part of a policy deliberative process.
As somebody who
it's not a matter for the Office of the Revenue Commissioner.
But what you know, but it is when you cite the OECD.
Sorry, Deputy, I didn't talk about tax havens. I talked about our practice in tackling tax evasion in relation to offshore accounts. And that's all I talked about.
And there's no need to be so defensive, because all I'm doing is putting questions.
I am not defensive at all.
Okay, well, all I'm doing is putting questions, and I'm reading from a statement that you made where you say Revenue's approach to tackling offshore evasion is recognised by the OECD. And that's then the benchmark. So I'm reading from two reports from the OECD. One was in 2000, where they identified 7 jurisdictions that they say were tax havens: Andorra, the Principality of Liechtenstein; Liberia, the Principality of Monaco; the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Vanuatu. In May 2009, the same OECD say there are no tax havens and no jurisdiction is currently listed as a tax haven by the Committee on Fiscal Affairs. So the OECD themselves are saying, and it seems to be a flat earth view of the world in my view, that there is no tax havens operating in the world. So when you as Head of Revenue then cite the OECD as the benchmark upon which we should judge whether or not Ireland is either facilitating tax avoidance or tax evasion, or is a tax haven or is not, I don't think holds up when I look at the reports from the OECD themselves. And that's the point I make.
Deputy, you are misquoting what I said.
I have the direct quote here.
Sorry. What I was talking about is the use of offshore accounts and offshore financial instruments by Irish tax residents to avoid Irish tax. It has nothing to do with a debate around whether a country is a tax haven or not. So what we were dealing with in the context of originally the bogus non-resident accounts, followed by the use of bank accounts by Irish residents and Irish citizens to hide money that was subject to Irish tax. And that's what I was talking about last night with your colleague Deputy Doherty, and we had a really good exchange in relation to tackling that. So you are now conflating what I said last night with a debate, which is a really political debate around whether a tax code of a country is to be considered as part of a tax haven.
No,
so they're totally different things.
With respect, I'm not. And
yes, you are.
No, I'm not. Sorry,
Absolutely.
With respect, Mr. Cody. And what I have put to you is exactly what you said. So if you just sit back and listen for a second to what I am actually saying. What you said was that Revenue's approach to tackling offshore evasion is recognised by the OECD as best practice. Is that what you said? Yes. So you are offering up the OECD and their standards as the standards in which we should judge whether or not your approach is best practice. What I'm saying is that this is the same organisation who in the same breath are telling us that there is no tax havens at all. And that's the point I'm making. So I'll move off that because I think you, with respect, completely misunderstood the context of where I was coming from. But I've made that point. I want to move on to the research and development credit, if I can. And you have accepted that the credit has sharply increased over the space of 5 years. And do you have those figures available? Could you tell us what the figures were over a 5-year period?
I can, Deputy, yeah. As I said, in 2015, the exchequer cost was 708 million. In 2014, it was 553 million. In 2013, it was 421 million. In 2012, it was 282 million. I can go back to...
That's okay. And is it also the case that the number of companies in receipt of the credit has actually gone down?
I can give you the equivalent numbers for each of those years, if that would suit you. It was 1532 in 2015. In 2014, it was 1570. In 2013, it was 1576. And in 2012, it was 1543.
Is it the case that 10 companies actually claimed 460 million of those tax credits? Is that correct?
I think we've given those figures in previous. I can confirm that. There was 80 in 2015. There was 82 claimants that claimed in excess of 750,000.
Yeah, million, you mean?
So we can give the committee a breakdown of all
if
those
you could,
figures.
because my understanding is that 10 companies claimed two-thirds of the overall amount, which is 460 million.
I think we provided that information in a parliamentary question recently.
Okay, and I'm asking here, so I'm just looking for a clarification as to whether it's correct or not. So I'm assuming it is correct, which means then that a lot of smaller companies who are trying to encourage to develop and grow may not be getting a fair crack of the whip here. And if it is the case that we now have a tax credit in place that's simply going to the top companies, if you like, and is not filtering down into smaller companies, would that not be a concern? And I know the policy, the setting of the policy is not a matter for yourself. Maybe the department can respond to this. Have they any concerns? Maybe I'll put this to the department. Have you any concerns, Mr. Hogan, in respect of the application of this particular tax credit?
As the Chairman has articulated there has been an increased cost in the R&D tax credit over the last number of years. From our own perspective, we have conducted a series of evaluations of the R&D tax credit, most notably in 2016, budget 2017. It was published as part of the pack there. From the outcome of that quite detailed review, and it is available on our website, the R&D tax credit was seen as being responsible for 60% of the additionality of R&D that was happening in the country. And I think that compares favourably to other similar types of interventions. But it's a general measure available to companies large and small who incur the type of R&D expenditure that qualifies under the incentive. And from our perspective, obviously, it's something that we continue to review on a regular basis in line with our tax expenditure guidelines.
Would there be any concern that companies would be inflating the R&D that's been done? Has that been something that would have at all concerned the department? Is that something that forms part of your examination of this tax credit?
It's certainly not something that's been brought to our attention. Ron, do you want to?
Thank you, Deputy. I don't think we have a particular concern about inflated claims. I think there has been some clarification provided recently to explain some of the disparity between CSO figures around research and what we're seeing on the R&D tax credit. There was a degree of double counting there, and I think we've corrected the record of the House to sort of clarify that. And I think separately, as the Chairman has outlined, there's a risk-based audit approach in revenue, which I think you may have alluded to yourself, in terms of generating additional tax paid to make sure that claims are legitimate and valid and comply with the requirements.
Okay, I can just come to Apple now for a few moments. Sorry.
If it's useful, as I said earlier, we carry out.
Just a question on Apple, if I can.
We carry out a risk-based programme in relation to the R&D credit, and in 2016 we would have carried out a series of interventions, and we would have restricted the R&D credit by just under 13 million for that year, based on it. And I said earlier that because we had a good discussion about our audit programme in relation to R&D in June last, and that we carry out risk-based audits on the R&D credit, because it is a valuable credit. There is no question about that. We also are, in the context of changes over the period and small enterprises, and the key for R&D credit is that the R&D expenditure has to take place. That's the first. So, but what we've been doing is trying to ensure that if a small enterprise is carrying out R&D, that the appropriate documentation, and in February 2017 we issued guidance around specifically how small and medium enterprises engaged in R&D would help them, and we engage with Enterprise Ireland around the record keeping that's needed on that to ensure that if they are carrying out qualifying R&D expenditure, that they are getting the credit they're entitled to.
What I might do is come back to the Apple issues if we come back a second time. Just one final question for Mr. Cody in terms of, and I think this is something you said last night as well, that Revenue will investigate thoroughly and will seek to recover the tax avoided together with interest and avoidance surcharges. Has anybody in this state over the last 5 years been subject to any criminal sanctions for not paying tax?
Absolutely. And we talked about it last night again. I gave the figures last night about the people who have been prosecuted for serious tax and duty offences, criminal prosecutions, custodial sentences over the last 5 years.
And would you have data that you could provide this committee with? Is that sensitive information? Obviously we're not looking for the names of the individuals, but in terms of numbers. In
2016, prosecutions for serious evasion, number of convictions for serious evasion in 2016 was 18. And there's a pipeline of cases that are going through. There's another 16 cases that have been referred to the DPP. So, as you're aware, that an investigation leading to a criminal prosecution takes a significant period of time, and there's a various level of stages. In the context of the 18 convictions, there was custodial sentences imposed in 16 of those. Some of them were fully suspended, some of them were partially suspended. Actual prison terms are imposed in 4 cases, ranging from 3 months to 1 year. To September this year, we have had 19 convictions for serious tax and duty evasion.
Okay, you might just maybe forward us with a note. I'll come back on Apple later.